Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, and I'd like to welcome you aboard Flight
Can't see
226.
anything.
Looks
Damn,
like
we're
we'll
off
be a
course.
little over 2
I
hours
can't
en route.
see it. Way off. On a stormy night, a race against time became a fight for survival. Pilots pushed past their limits, driven by an invisible pressure to stay on schedule. But in the chaos of a violent storm, one fatal mistake would seal their fate. This is not just the story of a plane crash. It is the story of a system-wide failure that would cost 11 people their lives. This is American Airlines Flight 1420. Welcome to Airshock AI, where we dissect the tragic stories behind aviation disasters to uncover the critical lessons they left behind. Today, we delve into the devastating crash of American Airlines Flight 1420, a tragedy that exposed the lethal consequences of pilot error, severe weather, and a dangerous culture of corporate pressure. We will explore how a routine flight was transformed into a terrifying race against time, and how a cascade of bad decisions led to an unspeakable disaster. If these kinds of deep dive analyses fascinate you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Now, let's begin. On the evening of June 1999, the skies over the southern United States were brewing with a formidable threat, a massive system of fierce thunderstorms. For American Airlines Flight 1420, a routine MD-82 jetliner scheduled to fly from Dallas-Fort Worth to Little Rock, this weather was more than an inconvenience. It was a deadline that could not be missed. The flight was already running late, a staggering 2 hours behind schedule. This delay, while frustrating for the 139 passengers on board, placed immense, unspoken pressure on the flight crew. In the highly competitive world of commercial aviation, a pilot's success is often measured by their ability to maintain a tight schedule. It's a carefully choreographed dance of global fleets, and a single delayed flight can ripple across the entire system, leading to missed connections, additional costs, and frustrated passengers. This intense competition created a powerful strain on everyone involved, from the dispatchers to the flight attendants and, most critically, the pilots. The unspoken rule was clear. The mission must be accomplished, and it must be accomplished on time. The flight crew of 1420, led by Captain Richard Bushman and his first officer, a recent new hire, were acutely aware of this pressure. They were also pushing against their legal duty time limits. As the first officer noted to the dispatcher, they were in danger of running out of time. The message was stark. They had to take off within the next hour or the flight would be cancelled entirely. To the pilots, cancelling was not an option. As the crew prepared for departure, they received a weather briefing. The report painted a grim picture of the storms massing around their destination, but it also offered a glimmer of hope. The dispatcher and captain believed they could navigate through a narrow, clear corridor between two storm cells, which they optimistically dubbed the bowling alley. They thought if they could just take off and get to Little Rock quickly, they could beat the storms to the airport. This dangerous gamble, born out of the pressure to complete the mission, had begun even before the plane had left the ground. For the passengers, the mood was a mix of exhaustion and urgency. Many, like Rennie Solomons and her 2 children, were simply trying to get home after a vacation. Her young daughter was on her first ever flight. The long delays were frustrating, but as they were finally called to board the plane, the crew's urgency was palpable. They just wanted us there, and just get on really quickly. Just get on, sit down, put your seatbelt on, we're going, Solomons would later recall. The crew made a brief but unsettling announcement about bad weather between them and Little Rock, assuring everyone they would get ahead of the bad weather. But for many on board, the feeling of unease had already set in. The race against the weather and against time had officially begun. This flight was late, and the pilots were under immense pressure to make up for lost time. In your opinion, what is the most dangerous consequence of this kind of corporate pressure in the aviation industry? Is it the rush to take off, the push to land in bad weather, or the potential for a pilot to ignore their own safety instincts? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 40 minutes after leaving Dallas, Flight 1420 was just 100 miles from Little Rock. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere for now was calm. The cockpit voice recorder transcripts from this period reveal a steady, routine dialogue between Captain Bushman, an experienced pilot with over 10 zero flight hours, and First Officer Origley, a new hire on one of his first trips. They were relaxed, confident in their plan to slip through the bowling alley. The pilots were keeping a close eye on the storms ahead, using their onboard weather radar, which showed the most severe parts of the storm in bright red. "There's your big wadidley," a pilot commented, referencing a major storm cell. "We got to get over there real quick." They believed their strategy was solid. A dispatcher had confirmed their plan, reassuring them there was a clear path. "Thunderstorms are on the left and right," he said. "Little Rock is clear, sort of like a bowling alley approach. I suggest expediting our arrival." The dispatcher had a less sophisticated monochromatic radar that couldn't determine the intensity of the storms, leading him to believe the path was clearer than it was. But as Flight 1420 descended, the walls of that bowling alley were beginning to close in. The passengers were also keenly aware of the storm's presence. As the plane made its way toward Little Rock, they began to see a spectacular but terrifying light show outside their windows. The lightning seemed to be on both sides of the plane. One passenger recalled, "It lit up the inside of the plane. Very quick, you know. Just kaboom-type lightning," which was a little scary. The pilots too acknowledged the spectacle, but their focus was on their mission. They were now in a rush, a state of mind that the NTSB would later call a form of get there-itis, a dangerous fixation on reaching the destination. The turbulence began to pick up, and the plane started to shake more violently. The flight attendants struggled to secure the cabin as the crew hurried to complete their descent checks. "We got to get there quick," one of the pilots said. The atmosphere, once calm, was becoming charged with urgency. A flight attendant, trying to finish serving passengers, was told to finish it up real quick, a clear indication of the crew's mounting workload and growing stress. The crew of Flight 1420 had a plan to fly through a bowling alley of storms. As an observer, what is your biggest concern about this plan? Is it the dispatcher's unreliable radar, the pilot's overconfidence, or the risk of the storms closing in too quickly? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. As Flight 1420 got closer to Little Rock, the situation began to spiral out of control. When the pilots contacted the controller at Little Rock, they received the first of a series of alarming reports. The controller warned them that a thunderstorm was moving into the area and that the winds were now gusting at a staggering 44 knots. The crosswind limit for the plane on a wet runway was 30 knots. This information should have been a red flag, but the pilots became confused about the specific limits for a wet runway, a discussion that was never resolved. This was only the beginning of their problems. Suddenly, the controller issued a wind shear alert. Wind shear, a sudden and violent change in wind direction, is one of the most feared weather phenomena in aviation. To counteract the constantly shifting winds, The pilots were forced to throw out their original approach plan and make a difficult but prudent decision to land in the opposite direction, directly into the headwind. But this maneuver came with a cost. It added another 10 minutes to their flight time, precious minutes that were giving the storm more time to intensify. With their old plan abandoned, the workload in the cockpit became immense. As the pilots turned, their onboard weather radar briefly lost track of the storm. They were now flying on instruments and the limited information from a frustrated controller who confessed that the plane's radar was a lot better than what I have. With visibility rapidly deteriorating due to heavy rain, the pilots were forced to attempt a visual approach. But in the pitch-black night and the blinding storm, they struggled to keep the runway in sight. "I don't see how we can maintain visual," one pilot said, abandoning the visual approach. They had to switch back to the instrument landing system, losing even more time. The captain's frustration was palpable. "Yeah, I hate rolling around visual at night and weather without having any clue where we are," he said. This was a critical moment. An experienced pilot, a man with 0 hours of flight time, was admitting that he was lost and out of options, yet he continued the approach. The pilots received numerous warnings about the storm, including high winds and wind shear. They even admitted to feeling lost in the bad weather. Why do you think they didn't abort the landing and divert to another airport? What kept them pushing forward despite all the red flags? Share your thoughts in the comments. As Flight 1420 began its final approach, it was flying directly into the heart of the thunderstorm. The runway visibility was now down to a dangerously low 30 feet, and the plane was being violently tossed around by the wind. Passengers were terrified. One recalled buckling up, almost uncomfortably tight, and another, a seasoned traveler, felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "I said words to the effect that if he tries to land in this weather, we'll crash." In the final seconds of the flight, the cockpit was a scene of controlled chaos. The pilots, rattled and overwhelmed, began to make mistakes. In a state of what the NTSB would later call cognitive overload, they missed a crucial step on their pre-landing checklist. They forgot to arm the ground spoilers. Spoilers are large panels on the wings that flip up on landing. Their purpose is twofold. They spoil the airflow over the wings, destroying lift and forcing the plane down onto the runway, and they activate the braking system. Without the spoilers deployed, the plane's brakes were almost useless. The plane touched down hard, and the passengers felt a jolt. But instead of slowing down, the MD-82 continued its terrifying dash down the runway at over 100 miles per hour. The co-pilot screamed, "On the brakes! Oh no!" as they slid uncontrollably. The plane ran off the end of the runway, plowing through a 25-foot embankment and slammed into a steel walkway. The impact was catastrophic, ripping the plane into several pieces. The wreckage finally came to rest on the muddy banks of the Arkansas River. 10 passengers and Captain Bushman were killed in the crash. The co-pilot and many of the surviving passengers were left with a profound, life-altering trauma. The scene was one of utter devastation, with passengers scrambling to get away from the mangled wreckage before fire engulfed the cabin. It was just chaos. It was terrifying, quite literally terrifying, one survivor recalled. The silence after the crash was broken by the screams of a young girl, a sound that one father would never forget. The NTSB concluded that the pilots failed to arm the ground spoilers, a critical mistake that cost 11 people their lives. In such a high-stress, high-workload environment, do you think it's fair to place all the blame on the pilots for a single fatal omission? Or do you believe the pressure and chaotic conditions were the real culprits? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The NTSB's investigation lasted for 18 months. They quickly determined that the failure of the ground spoilers was the primary reason the plane couldn't stop. But the inquiry went deeper, seeking to understand the root causes behind this fatal mistake. The NTSB found that American Airlines policy regarding flying into thunderstorms was too subjective and lacked clear, non-negotiable boundaries. It essentially left the decision entirely up to the pilot, a policy that, as the investigation showed, was a recipe for disaster. The investigation uncovered a chilling, industry-wide problem. Pilots were regularly flying into thunderstorms. A study by MIT found that 2 out of every 3 pilots would fly into a storm rather than divert, especially if they were running late, if it was night, and if other planes were also doing it. All 3 of these factors were present on the night of the crash. The NTSB ultimately concluded that the culture of get-there-itis had played a vital role in the crash of Flight 1420. The pilots, at the end of a long, frustrating day, were so determined to complete their mission that they pushed past all reasonable safety limits. In the aftermath, American Airlines revised its checklist procedures, requiring both pilots to confirm that the spoilers were armed. The NTSB published its report in October 2001, concluding that the 2 main causes were the pilots' decision to land in the thunderstorm and their failure to arm the spoilers. While American Airlines declined to comment on the findings, the lessons learned from the crash forced the industry to re-evaluate its approach to severe weather and pilot decision-making. For the survivors, the crash left a permanent scar. "We as a family worked long and hard to work through it," Rennie Solomons reflected. "It blew apart a lot of relationships. You find out who your real friends are." The impact was profound and lasting, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. The crash of Flight 1420 was a tragic lesson that a combination of human pressure and systemic failure can turn a routine flight into an unthinkable disaster. It was a wake-up call to an industry that sometimes lost sight of the fact that a pilot's most important job is not to be on time, but to be safe. The crash of Flight 1420 led to major changes in aviation safety. But do you think a culture of get-there-itis and cutting corners for profit still exists today? What do you believe is the most important lesson from this crash for modern aviation, and what steps should be taken to ensure it never happens again? Let us know what you think in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Subscribe to Airshock AI for more stories that reveal the hidden truths behind aviation disasters. We'll see you next time.